My brother stood in front of my coworkers and bragged he was the new partner, like I was just someone to manage. I smiled while my stomach turned, because I'd been building a buyout in silence for months, tracking every late-night edit and every dirty vendor clause. When he raised his glass, I was already holding the match that could burn his lies down. The fog rolling off the harbor in Briarhaven was thick enough to taste, a heavy, briny gray blanket that pressed against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office. It was 7 in the evening on a Tuesday, and the rest of the floor was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the server stacks down the hall and the cleaning crew vacuuming the reception area. On my desk sat the finalized quarterly report for Alderwick Systems. It was a dense, 70-page document that represented 3 months of my life. I ran my thumb over the binding. This quarter had been a disaster of logistical errors, server downtimes, and client panic, all of which I had personally smoothed over with sleepless nights and very specific, reassuring phone calls. I had stabilized the ship. We were profitable. We were safe. A shadow fell across the doorway. I did not need to look up to know who it was. The scent of expensive sandalwood cologne and fresh espresso drifted in before he did. Grant. My brother leaned against the doorframe, his suit jacket slung casually over one shoulder. His tie loosened just enough to look roguish rather than sloppy. He was 36, 3 years older than me, and possessed the kind of effortless, symmetrical handsomeness that made people want to agree with him before he even finished a sentence. "You look like you are trying to solve a murder." "Viv," he said, his voice rich and teasing, "it is just a Q3 report. The numbers are the numbers." I looked up. "The numbers are good because I made them good." Grant. "We were projected to miss our targets by 15%. I renegotiated the vendor contracts in week 8. Grant waved a hand dismissively, walking into my office and picking up a stress ball from my desk, tossing it lightly in the air. "Details. That is why you are so good at operations. You love the weeds. I prefer the view from the chaotic clouds." He walked to the window, staring out at the gray nothingness of the waterfront. "I heard Malcolm is calling an all-hands tomorrow morning," Grant said, his tone shifting. It was subtle, but I heard the vibration of hunger in it. I stiffened. Malcolm Larkin, our founder and CEO, never called morning meetings unless something was broken or sold. Malcolm was 68, a man who built this company on a handshake and code written in a basement. But lately, he had looked tired. His skin had a papery, translucent quality, and his hands had developed a tremor he tried to hide by keeping them in his pockets. "I heard that too," I said, keeping my voice neutral, probably just the quarterly recap. Grant turned, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Or it is the transition. He's been hinting at it for months. The old guard is tired. Viv, the market wants fresh blood. It wants energy." He looked at his reflection in the glass, adjusting his collar. "I have a feeling things are about to change around here," he said softly, "finally being recognized for the vision I bring to this place. It is about time." He tossed the stress ball back onto my desk. It bounced once and rolled off the edge. "Don't stay too late, little sister. You will ruin your eyes staring at spreadsheets." He walked out, whistling a tune I did not recognize. I sat in the silence of my office, listening to the vacuum cleaner in the distance, and felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It was not fear. It was the sinking realization that my brother believed, with absolute sincerity, that he had earned something he had never actually worked for. The announcement came at 10 o'clock the next morning. The conference room was packed, the air stale with body heat and nervous anticipation. Malcolm Larkin stood at the head of the mahogany table. He looked smaller than I remembered, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. "I have always believed that a company is like a living organism," Malcolm began, his voice raspy. "It needs to evolve. For 30 years, I have steered this ship, but my doctors tell me that if I want to see 30 more, I need to let go of the wheel." A murmur went through the room. I glanced at Grant. He was sitting 2 seats away from Malcolm, leaning forward, his face composed into a mask of solemn concern that did not quite reach his eyes. His eyes were bright, darting around the room, counting votes. measuring loyalty. I will be stepping back from day-to-day operations effective immediately. Malcolm continued. The board has formed a leadership transition committee to determine the next phase of Alderwick systems. In the interim, I want you all to focus on stability. Malcolm paused, looking around the room. His gaze landed on me, and he offered a weak, tired smile. Then he looked at Grant. Grant nodded, a sharp, affirmative gesture, as if they were sharing a secret code. After the meeting broke up, the hallway was a hive of whispers. I tried to make my way back to my office, but the air felt thick with speculation. Vivian! Grant's voice cut through the noise. He was standing near the water cooler, surrounded by 3 junior account executives who were looking at him with rapt attention. He waved me over. Did you hear that? Grant beamed, clapping a hand on my shoulder. Leadership Transition Committee. That is corporate speak for passing the torch. It means they are evaluating candidates. Grant, I said, shifting my shoulders so his hand dropped away. It is not a coronation. He laughed, a loud barking sound that made the account executive smile nervously, always the pragmatist. You worry too much. The board knows who has the relationships. They know who brings the energy. You keep the lights on. Viv, and you are brilliant at it, but they need someone to drive the car. He winked at the group. My sister, everyone, the best mechanic in the business. But you don't let the mechanic drive the Ferrari, right? The junior executives chuckled. I felt the heat rise up my neck, hot and prickly. It was not just the insult. It was the casualness of it. He did not think he was being cruel. He thought he was merely stating a fact of nature, like gravity or rain. I have work to do, I said, turning on my heel. As I walked away, I heard him say, low enough for the group, but loud enough for me to catch. She gets tense when the stakes get high. Great with data, bad with pressure. The Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Ashford Glen was a ritual I had tried to escape for a decade. But guilt was a powerful tether. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, smelling of roast chicken and floor wax. My mother, Lenora, sat at the head of the table, her eyes darting between Grant and me, monitoring the emotional temperature like a meteorologist watching a storm front. So, Grant, my mother said, pouring gravy with a heavy hand, tell us more about this committee. Is it happening? Grant took a long sip of his red wine, savoring it. It is moving fast. Mom, I had a drink with Elaine Mercer from the board on Friday. Just informal, but she was asking all the right questions. She wants to know where I see the company in 5 years. And what did you say? My father asked, looking up from his plate. He was a quiet man who had spent 40 years in insurance, and he looked at Grant with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. I told her the truth. Grant said, leaning back, Alderwick is stagnant. We are safe, but we are boring. We need to leverage our client base, expand into AI-driven logistics, and stop playing defense. I told her we need a partnership mindset, not a maintenance mindset. He looked across the table at me. Vivian disagrees. Of course, she likes safe. I set my fork down carefully. I do not like safe. Grant, I like solvent. We have cash reserves because I froze the hiring budget last year. If we had pivoted to A, I like you wanted 6 months ago without the infrastructure, we would be bankrupt. Grant rolled his eyes, a theatrical gesture for our parents' benefit. See? This is what I mean. Bankrupt. Frozen. It is all fear-based language. Leaders speak in possibilities. Viv, managers speak in limitations. Vivian, honey, my mother interjected, her voice sickly sweet. Don't be so negative. Your brother is just excited. You know how you get? You overthink things until you talk yourself out of them. I gripped the linen napkin in my lap until my knuckles turned white. I am the director of operations, Mom. My job is to think about the things that break. And you are good at it, Grant said magnanimously, raising his glass. You are a great number 2. Every captain needs a good first mate to handle the manifest. But let's be honest, at the dinner table, you are too careful to lead. You don't have the stomach for the risk. He took a bite of chicken, chewing thoughtfully. It is a personality thing. You are made for support. I am made for partnerships. It is just biology. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to defend me, to say that I had graduated summa cum laude, that I had saved the company 3 times in the last 4 years, that I worked 80-hour weeks while Grant played golf with vendors. She just smiled and pushed the bowl of peas toward me. Eat your vegetables. Vivian, you look tired. I swallowed the insult. It tasted like ash. I took a scoop of peas, forced a smile, and said nothing. To speak would be to prove him right. That I was emotional, difficult, hysterical. Silence was the only armor I had left in this house. 2 days later, I was in the break room, waiting for the coffee machine to finish its sputtering cycle. The partition wall was thin, and I could hear voices coming from the hallway around the corner. It was 2 of the sales managers, Kevin and Sarah. Saw him at the Oarsman yesterday. Kevin was saying he was with some guy in a 3-piece suit, not a client, looked like private equity money. Grant? Sarah asked. Yeah. He was laughing, looking like he owned the place. I heard him say, once the ink is dry on the partnership deal. Do you think he's already got the job? He must, Sarah replied. Why else would he be meeting with outside money? If he takes over, maybe we'll finally get those commission structure changes he promised. I grabbed my coffee, my hand trembling slightly. Grant meeting with private equity? That was not part of a leadership transition. That was something else. I went back to my desk and opened my calendar. I clicked through the shared executive layers. Usually, Grant's calendar was a mess of blocked-out times labeled strategy or networking, which usually meant long lunches. But as I scrolled through the next week, I saw nothing. Then, a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. It was a calendar invite, forwarded from Grant's administrative assistant, Maribel. She must have hit the wrong distribution list. Subject: Partner Alignment Lunch. Attendees: Grant Hayes, Copperline Representative. Elaine Mercer. Location: The Vault. Time: Thursday, 12:30. My name was not on the list. Elaine Mercer was the chair of the board. If Grant was having a private lunch with the board chair and a representative from a consulting firm, without the director of operations present, the decision had already been made. I stared at the screen. The invite stayed there for 10 seconds before it vanished. Maribel had recalled it. I sat back in my chair, the office noise fading into a dull roar. They were cutting me out. It was not just a promotion for him. It was an excision of me. I needed a sanity check. I walked down to the 3rd floor, to the office of Dana Rowe, our CFO. Dana was 55, a woman with iron-gray hair and a mind like a steel trap. She was the only person in the C-suite I truly respected. She looked up as I entered, taking off her reading glasses. You look like you've seen a ghost. Viv, close the door. I closed it and sat down. Grant is meeting with Elaine Mercer and someone from Copperline Consulting on Thursday. I was excluded. Dana sighed, rubbing her temples. She did not look surprised. That concerned me more than if she had been shocked. Vivian, she said softly, the board is spooked. The market is volatile. Our stock has been flat for 6 quarters. They don't want stability anymore. They want a story. But I give them results. I argued. Results are boring, Dana said bluntly. Grant tells a story. He sells them a vision of exponential growth, of acquisition, of flash. He makes them feel like they are missing out on something big if they don't back him. You make them feel safe, but safety doesn't double the stock price in a year. She leaned forward. I have been in those meetings. Vivian, they are talking about a new direction, and Grant is positioning himself as the only one who can deliver it. He is framing you as the legacy choice, the safe pair of hands that you keep in the back room, not the face you put on the magazine cover. And you? I asked. What do you think? Dana looked at her hands. I think Grant is a liability wrapped in a nice suit. But I have one vote, and right now, the wind is blowing his way. If you have any cards to play, Vivian, you better play them now, because once they announce him, it is over. I left her office feeling a cold clarity settle over me. I did not have cards. I had work. And if Grant was telling a story, I needed to find the plot holes. I spent the next 6 hours going through the vendor payment logs. I focused on Copperline Consulting. They were a new integration partner Grant had brought in 3 months ago to help with workflow optimization. The invoices were small, $5,000 here, $8,000 there, innocuous amounts that would fly under the radar of a standard audit. But as I lined them up in a spreadsheet, a pattern emerged. Every invoice was approved on a Friday afternoon. Every invoice was just under the $10,000 threshold that required my direct sign-off. And every invoice was routed through an executive fast-track channel that bypasses the standard procurement review, a channel that only VP-level officers could authorize. Grant was approving payments to a consulting firm that did not seem to be producing any deliverables. I checked the project folders. There were no reports from Copperline, no slide decks, no code, just payments. I printed the ledger sheets and slid them into a manila folder. It was smoke. I needed to find the fire. That Friday, the company held a happy hour at a gastropub down the street. It was mandatory fun, the kind of event where you were expected to loosen your tie and pretend you liked the people you spent 40 hours a week arguing with. I stood near the back, nursing a club soda. Grant was at the center of the bar, holding a whiskey sour, surrounded by the same sycophants from the hallway. He was glowing. He looked like a man who had already won. "Everyone, listen up!" Grant shouted, raising his glass. The room quieted down. "I just want to propose a toast," he said, his voice projecting easily to the back of the room. "To Alderwick. We have had a long run, but I have a feeling that the best days are just ahead of us. We are about to shed the old skin. We are about to step into the big leagues." He raised his glass higher, to new beginnings, and to having the authority to finally fix what has been broken for so long. The room cheered. Employees clapped, but as they drank, I saw eyes dart toward me. They knew. They all knew. They looked at me with that terrible, crushing pity. Poor Vivian, the workhorse, pushed aside for the show pony. Grant's eyes met mine across the room. He smiled. A genuine, brotherly smile. He did not hate me. He just thought I was irrelevant. He thought I was furniture. I placed my untouched drink on a high-top table and walked out the door into the cool night air. I did not go home. I went back to the empty office. My office was dark, lit only by the street lamps outside. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I kept the serious files in. Underneath a stack of tax forms, there was a black notebook. I pulled it out and blew a thin layer of dust off the cover. I had bought this notebook 2 years ago, on a rainy afternoon when I had first realized that Malcolm and the other founders were getting too old to fight off the sharks. I had written down a plan, a crazy, ambitious plan that I had abandoned because I thought it was disloyal. I opened it to the first page. My handwriting from 2 years ago was sharp and angular. Project Anchor, acquisition strategy via holding entity. I read through my own notes. I had mapped out the company's valuation. I had identified the liabilities. I had calculated the exact amount of capital needed to trigger a leveraged buyout if the stock price dipped below a certain threshold. I had abandoned it because I wanted to be a good employee. I wanted to be a good sister. I closed the notebook and put it in my bag. I was done being good. The cafe near Briarhaven Common was small, smelling of roasted beans and rain. It was Saturday morning, and the city was waking up slowly. I sat in the back booth, the black notebook on the table in front of me. Across from me sat Marcus Pell, a financial advisor I had known since business school. He was a conservative man, careful with words and even more careful with money. He tapped a calculator with a long, manicured finger. "The structure is sound." "Vivian," Marcus said, looking at the pages I had shown him, "you have the liquidity in your personal trust. Combined with the leverage from the quiet investor group you mentioned 2 years ago, we kept those channels open. Technically. But is it viable?" I asked, my voice steady. "Can I buy it?" Marcus took a sip of his tea. "Technically, yes. If you form a holding entity, you can start acquiring the voting shares from the minority holders. The retirees, the ones who haven't paid attention in a decade, they will sell if the price is right. But to get controlling interest, You need a catalyst. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. You need the stock to wobble. If the transition goes smoothly and Grant is announced as the savior, the price goes up. You can't afford it then. You need the board to hesitate. You need a liability that scares them enough to look for a lifeboat. I thought about the copper line invoices. I thought about the fast-track approvals. I might have a liability, I said, but I need to prove it before they sign anything with Grant. Marcus nodded. Then you are on a clock. If they sign a partnership agreement with him that includes equity vesting, he becomes impossible to remove without blowing up the company. You have to move before the ink hits the paper. I leaned back. Start the paperwork for the holding entity. Call it Seawick Harbor Partners. Keep my name off the primary filings. Use the blind trust structure. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You are really going to do this? You are going to hostile take over your own family? I looked out the window at the rain falling on the common. I thought about Grant's toast, to fixing what has been broken. I am not taking it over. Marcus, I am taking it back. Sunday night. I was at my apartment, a modest one-bedroom overlooking the industrial district. I was reviewing the formation documents Marcus had sent over when my phone pinged with an email notification. It was 11:30 at night. I opened my laptop. The email was from Grant, but the subject line was blank. There was no body text, just an attachment. It was a PDF. I opened it. It was a draft press release, formatted on Alderwick Systems letterhead, dated for the following Monday. For immediate release, Alderwick Systems announces new strategic leadership, Briarhaven, Massachusetts. Alderwick Systems is proud to announce the appointment of Grant Hayes as strategic partner and managing principal. Mr. Hayes will oversee all executive functions and steer the company's new initiative into AI-integrated logistics. I scrolled down. My eyes scanned the text until I found my own name, supporting the new leadership vision. Vivian Hayes will transition to the role of Senior Operations Manager, reporting directly to the Managing Principal's office, ensuring continuity in legacy systems. Senior Operations Manager. He was demoting me. Director to Manager. Legacy systems. He was putting me in the basement to keep the lights on while he played CEO upstairs. He hadn't meant to send it to me. I checked the recipients. He had meant to send it to his personal email, probably to print it out and admire it, but his autocomplete had grabbed my email address instead. I stared at the screen. The blue light washed over my face in the dark apartment. My hands were not shaking anymore. The cold knot in my stomach was gone. In its place was something hard and heavy, like a stone settling at the bottom of a well. He thought I was the mechanic. He thought I was the safe choice. He thought I would swallow this insult like I had swallowed every other one at the dinner table for 30 years. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. I know it is late, I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Vivian, is everything okay? Everything is fine, I said, staring at the words, Managing Principal. I just wanted to tell you to expedite the filing for Seawick Harbor. I want the offer letters to the minority shareholders to go out on Tuesday morning. Tuesday? Marcus asked, waking up. That is aggressive. No, Marcus, I said, closing the laptop with a snap. It is just business. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark, listening to the rain hit the window, waiting for the war to begin. Monday arrived with a deceptive calm, the kind of silence that usually precedes a structural failure in a high-rise building. I walked into the office at 7:30 in the morning, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the polished concrete floors of the Alderwick Systems lobby. I smiled at the security guard, a man named Henry who had been with us for 6 years, and he nodded back, though his eyes lingered on me a fraction of a second too long. The rumor mill was already churning. I could feel it in the air, heavier than the humidity coming off the harbor. I went straight to my office and closed the door. Engaging the physical lock, it was a paranoid gesture, perhaps, but after the email Grant had accidentally sent me, the one demoting me to a glorified custodian of legacy systems, paranoid felt like a survival trait. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. Instead, I sat down, logged into the secure server, and began to dig. If Grant was going to frame me as incompetent, I needed to understand the mechanics of his own competence. I started with a quiet internal audit, a process I usually reserved for quarterly compliance checks. But this time, I was not looking for errors. I was looking for intent. I pulled up the approval chains for the last 6 months. The data sprawled across my dual monitors, a web of timestamps, user IDs, and authorization codes. I filtered for the irregularities I had noticed earlier, the fast-tracked vendor payments to Copperline Consulting. The pattern was smarter than I expected, but it was lazy. Most of the payments were approved during standard business hours, but the modifications to the contracts, the scope adjustments that justified the payments, were all happening after hours. I traced the edits. User ID MKNOX_ADMIN, Maribel Knox. Grant's executive assistant. I looked at the timestamps. 2 in the morning, 4:15 in the morning on a Sunday, 11:30 at night on a Tuesday. Maribel was a 24-year-old with a rescue dog and a penchant for leaving promptly at 5 o'clock to make spin class. She was not editing vendor scope agreements at 4 in the morning. Someone was using her credentials. I cross-referenced the login IP addresses. They were coming from the VPN, originating from a remote access point that I recognized immediately. It was the static IP assigned to Grant's home office in the city. He was too arrogant to even mask his digital footprint. He was logging in as his assistant to alter documents, likely to keep his own name off the audit trail. Assuming that no one would ever look closely at the activity logs of a secretary, I felt a cold thrill run through me. It was sloppy. It was reckless. And it was exactly the kind of loose thread that could unravel a sweater if you pulled hard enough. I printed the logs, not to the networked printer in the hallway, but to the small, secure laser printer I kept under my desk. As the pages slid out, warm and crisp, I realized I was not just building a defense, I was building a weapon. Later that afternoon, I found Dana Rowe in the company kitchenette, staring blankly at the espresso machine as if it held the secrets of the universe. Dana looked tired. Her usual sharp blazer was replaced by a heavy knit cardigan, and she was holding a mug that said, "I love spreadsheets," with a grim irony. She saw me and flinched, just slightly. "Vivian," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "keep walking. We should not be seen huddled together. The walls have ears today." I poured myself a glass of water, leaning against the counter so I was facing her but not looking directly at her. "I need to know about the trust. Dana, Malcolm's shares." Dana stiffened. She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes scanning the hallway. "Why?" "Because Grant is moving fast," I said, keeping my voice level, "and I need to know if there is a kill switch." Dana was silent for a long moment. She stirred her black coffee with a wooden stick. "The Larkin Family Trust holds 40% of the voting stock," she murmured. "Malcolm controls the vote as the trustee, but there is a stipulation. It was written 20 years ago when the company almost went under during the dot-com crash." She paused, checking the hallway again. "If the company's financial stability is threatened, defined by a specific set of liquidity ratios and debt obligations, the other beneficiaries of the trust can force a vote to sell the shares to restore asset value. It is a protection clause." "Who defines financial stability?" I asked. "The CFO," she said, finally looking at me. "Me? And right now. We are stable. Vivian, but if that changes, if someone could prove that the current leadership direction was creating a material risk..." She let the sentence hang in the air. "Material risk," I repeated. "Like fraudulent vendor contracts? Or executory liabilities that are not on the books?" Dana's eyes widened slightly. She did not ask me what I knew. She was too smart for that. She just nodded, a barely perceptible dip of her chin. "Be careful. Viv, if you pull a thread that unravels the company, you might get crushed by the debris. I am not the one unraveling it," I said, tossing my paper cup into the trash. "I am just the one documenting the collapse." On Wednesday. I drove out to Ashford Glen to see Malcolm. The drive was 40 minutes of winding suburban roads lined with oak trees and stone walls that cost more than my first car. Malcolm's estate was set back from the road, a sprawling colonial revival that used to bustle with parties and fundraisers. Now, the driveway was covered in a thin layer of unraked leaves. I found Malcolm in the sunroom at the back of the house. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a blanket draped over his legs, watching a muted news channel on the television. "Vivian," he said, his face lighting up with a warmth that made my chest ache. "To what do I owe the pleasure? You should be at the office. Who is steering the ship?" I sat on the ottoman across from him, taking his hand. His skin felt like parchment paper, dry and fragile. "The ship is fine. Malcolm, I just wanted to check on the captain." Malcolm sighed, a rattling sound in his chest. "The captain is retired. My dear, or so they tell me. Grant says I have earned my rest." He looked out the window at the overgrown garden. "Grant was here yesterday." Malcolm said softly, "He tells me you are struggling." I kept my expression frozen. "Struggling?" "He says you are taking the transition hard, that you are emotional." He used the word volatile. Malcolm squeezed my hand weakly. I told him that did not sound like my Vivian, but he said the pressure of the last quarter got to you. He said you were snapping at staff, that you were paranoid about the changes. I looked at this man, the man who had taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 12. The man who had been more of a father to me in business than my own father ever was. I saw the cloudiness in his eyes. He wanted to believe Grant. He wanted to believe that his successor was strong and capable, and that meant he had to believe I was the problem. It is a stressful time. "Malcolm," I said carefully, "change is always hard." He patted my hand. "You should take a vacation. Viv, go to the Cape. Grant says he has everything under control. He says he is building a partnership that will secure the company for the next 50 years. He is a visionary, your brother, just like I was." I felt a sharp sting of tears, but I blinked them back. Malcolm was not seeing Grant. He was seeing a reflection of his younger self, or at least the version of his younger self he wanted to remember. "I just want you to be safe." "Malcolm," I said, "I want the company to be safe." "It is," he whispered, closing his eyes. "It is in good hands." I stayed for another hour, making small talk about the weather and his grandchildren, but my mind was racing. Grant was not just maneuvering for the job. He was systematically dismantling my reputation with the one person who could stop him. He was painting me as the hysterical sister, the emotional liability. I left the house feeling hollowed out. I could not save Malcolm by telling him the truth. It would kill him, or worse, he would not believe me. I had to show him. The summons to Grant's office came on Thursday morning. His office was the largest on the executive floor. With a view that swept across the entire harbor, he had already started redecorating. The old mahogany desk was gone, replaced by a sleek glass slab that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. "Viv, come in, come in." Grant was standing by the window, holding a putter, practicing his golf swing on a strip of artificial turf he had rolled out over the carpet. He did not look up as I entered. "Close the door." "Will you?" I closed it. I stood in the middle of the room, my hands clasped in front of me. "I wanted to talk to you about your role," Grant said, tapping the golf ball. It rolled 3 feet and missed the cup. He frowned. I saw the draft announcement. "Grant?" I said, "Senior Operations Manager." Grant chuckled, finally looking at me. "Oh, that was just a draft. Viv, don't get hung up on titles. It is a demotion." I said, "It is a realignment," he corrected. Leaning on the putter. "Look, you and I both know you are burning out. I hear it from the staff. I hear it from Mom. You are seeing shadows everywhere. You are auditing vendor payments from 3 months ago? Why? I am doing my job." "Grant, you are being paranoid," he said, his voice hardening. "You are looking for enemies because you are afraid of the future." He walked over to his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "I am trying to help you. Viv, I am creating a role where you can still contribute without the pressure of leadership. You are great at the details. You are great at the checklists. I want you to run the legacy integration team. It is a vital role. Under you, I said, under the office of the managing principal. Yes, he smiled. A practiced, shark-like expression. It is a peace offering. Vivian, I am going to be running this company. That is happening. The board is ready. The investors are ready. You can either be on the team, in a role that suits your temperament, or you can be outside looking in. I looked at him. I looked at the tailored suit, the confident posture, the absolute, unshakable belief that he was the hero of this story. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I forced my shoulders to relax. I appreciate the offer. Grant, I said, I really do. I just want what is best for Alderwick. Good, he said, clapping his hands together. That is the spirit. We are going to do great things. Viv, I just need you to trust me. I trust you. I lied. As I walked out of his office, I pulled my phone from my pocket. The voice memo app was still running, the red waveform pulsing quietly on the screen. Role that suits your temperament. Paranoid legacy integration. I saved the file, labeling it evidence_01. Friday afternoon, I met Marston Pell. Marston was an old-school investor, a man who believed in dividends and debt-to-equity ratios rather than hype cycles. He had rejected my initial pitch 2 years ago because he thought the company was too small to warrant the complexity of a hostile restructuring. We met in a private conference room at the Briarhaven Athletic Club. The room smelled of leather and cigar smoke, though no one was smoking. You are persistent. Miss Hayes, Marston said, leafing through the binder I had slid across the mahogany table. I am correct, I replied. I watched him read. I had prepared a new deck. It was not about growth. It was about stabilization. I showed him the real numbers, the ones I had generated, not the ones Grant was showing the board. I showed him the operational inefficiencies Grant had introduced, and then I showed him the projection. If we clear the toxic contracts, I said, pointing to a graph, and if we streamline the vendor list, Alderwick becomes a cash flow machine within 2 quarters. We are not a growth stock. Marston, we are a yield stock. And right now, the company is being piloted by someone who is treating it like a venture capital casino. Marston stopped on the page detailing the phantom vendor payments. He adjusted his spectacles. These liabilities, he said, tapping the page. You can prove these? I have the logs, I said, and I have the approval chains. And the acquisition strategy? I laid out the plan. My holding company, Seawick Harbor Partners, would make a tender offer for the minority shares. The shares held by the retired engineers and the early employees who were tired of waiting for a liquidity event. We would buy them at a premium, gathering a voting block of 15%. 15% is not control, Marston noted. No, I said, but combined with the evidence of financial mismanagement, 15% is enough to trigger a vote of no confidence. It is enough to force the trust to act. Marston looked at me for a long time. His eyes were slate gray, unreadable. You are talking about removing your brother, he said. I am talking about removing a liability, I corrected. Marston closed the binder. He placed his hand on top of it. 2 years ago, you were asking for permission, he said quietly. Today, you are asking for ammunition. He pulled a fountain pen from his pocket. I like the numbers. Vivian, and I detest casinos. If you can secure the initial commitments from the minority holders, my firm will back the bridge loan for the controlling stake. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. Standing up, you still have to pull the trigger. And family feuds. They rarely leave survivors. The investigation into Copperline Consulting consumed my weekend. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and stacks of printed documents. I needed to know who was on the other end of those payments. I dug into the corporate registry. Copperline was an LLC registered in Delaware, which masked the ownership, but the registered agent address led back to a mail drop service in Boston. I kept digging. I looked for the name of the signatory on the contract Grant had signed. Elias Thorne. The name sounded familiar. I went to the bookshelf in my living room and pulled down my high school yearbooks, then my college alumni directories. Nothing. Then I checked Grant's social media. He had scrubbed his profiles recently, curating them to look more executive. But the internet never forgets. I used the Wayback Machine to look at his Facebook profile from 10 years ago. There it was, a photo from a fraternity ski trip. Grant, looking young and sunburned, with his arm around a guy in a ski jacket. The caption, "Me and Thorne owning the mountain, Elias Thorne, Grant's fraternity brother from UPenn." I searched for Elias Thorne on LinkedIn. He was listed as a strategic consultant with a work history that was vague at best. I went back to the contract. I read the fine print of the Master Services Agreement, the boring legal text that no one reads. Clause 14b, success fee. In the event of a change in control, defined as a sale of greater than 50% of voting stock or a restructuring of executive leadership, consultant shall be entitled to a success fee equal to 2% of the gross valuation of the transaction, payable immediately. I froze. If Grant sold the company, or if he restructured the leadership in a way that qualified as a change in control, like, say, becoming the managing principal and dissolving the old board structure, Elias Thorne would get 2% of the company's value. 2% of a $100 million company was $2 million, and since Elias was Grant's buddy, it did not take a genius to figure out that the money wasn't staying with Elias. It was a kickback. Grant was setting himself up to get a massive payout just for taking the job, funneling shareholder money out the back door to his friend. This was not just mismanagement, this was fraud. On Tuesday, the fear in the office was palpable. I was in the break room when Tom, one of our lead systems engineers, walked in. Tom had been with Alderwick for 15 years. He was a quiet guy who wore plaid shirts and kept the servers running through hurricanes. He looked around to make sure we were alone, then walked up to me. "Vivian," he said, his voice low. "Is it true?" "Is what true?" "Tom? That they are phasing out the ops team?" I frowned. "Who told you that?" Tom looked at his shoes. "Grant took a few of us out for drinks last night. The senior devs. He told us that the new vision is all about lean agility. He said the heavy operational layer, that was his phrase, was going to be redundant. He said you were tired, that you were looking to step back." I felt a surge of anger so hot it almost blinded me. He was terrorizing the staff to build loyalty to himself. "Stick with me, or you're out with Vivian." I put a hand on Tom's arm. "Tom, listen to me. I am not tired, and I am not stepping back." He looked at me, searching my face. He promised us promotions. "Vivian." He said if we backed the transition, there would be VP titles for the senior engineers, but he made it sound like we had to choose. "You don't have to choose. Tom," I said firmly, "just do your work. Keep the servers running. Let me worry about the politics." Tom nodded, but he didn't look reassured. He looked like a man who was watching the water rise and wondering where the lifeboats were. I went straight to Elaine Mercer's office. Elaine was the chair of the board, a woman who prided herself on being a peacemaker. She disliked conflict, which made her a terrible wartime consigliere, but a very pleasant dinner guest. "Elaine, I need to speak with you." She looked up from her iPad, smiling her practiced, corporate smile. "Vivian, everything all right?" "No," I said, closing the door. "Grant is destabilizing the engineering team. He is telling staff that I'm leaving. He is promising promotions he can't fund, and I have found irregularities in the vendor contracts he is signing." Elaine sighed. Taking off her glasses, she gestured for me to sit. "Vivian, we know you and Grant have different styles. This is not about style. Elaine, this is about governance. He is bypassing procurement." Elaine held up a hand. "Vivian, we are in a delicate transition. The market is watching. The employees are watching. What we need right now is unity. We need to present a cohesive front." She leaned forward, her voice softening into a patronizing coo. "Grant is dynamic. He is moving fast. Maybe he breaks a few dishes, but he is setting the table for a banquet. If you go around nitpicking his expense reports or his pep talks, you just look well, You look obstructionist. I stared at her. Nitpicking? I am asking you to support the transition. Vivian, for the good of the company, for your father's legacy, don't be the reason this fails. She checked her watch. Now, was there anything else? I have a lunch meeting. I stood up. My legs felt numb. No, Elaine, nothing else. I walked out. The board was not asleep at the wheel. They were in the back seat, wearing blindfolds, cheering for the driver to go faster. That evening, I heard a knock on my apartment door. It was my mother. Lenora Hayes stood in the hallway, clutching her purse like a shield. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes sweeping over my messy living room, the takeout boxes, the stacks of paper, the general air of a war room. "Oh, Vivian," she said, shaking her head. "Look at this place. Mom, I am working. You are always working." She sighed. "That is the problem." She sat on the edge of my sofa, careful not to touch the stack of affidavits I had just printed. "I spoke to Aunt Linda today," my mother said. "She asked how you were doing. Do you know what I had to tell her?" I waited. "I had to tell her that you are burned out, that you are having a breakdown." "Excuse me?" "Grant told us. Vivian, he is so worried about you. He says you are obsessed with him, that you're trying to sabotage his big moment because you can't handle the fact that he was chosen and you weren't." My mother looked at me with a mix of pity and disappointment. "Honey, you have always been intense. But this? Fighting your own brother? It is ugly. It is embarrassing the family." She stood up and walked over to me, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. I flinched away. "Stop competing with him. Vivian, it is not your role. He is the leader. You are the helper. That is how it has always been. Why can't you just be happy for him?" I looked at my mother. I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't defending Grant because she thought he was better. She was defending him because the alternative, that her golden boy was a fraud and her daughter was the only one strong enough to save the family name, was too terrifying to contemplate. It would require her to rewrite her entire understanding of her children. "I am not competing." "Mom," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage, "I am trying to keep him from driving us off a cliff." Lenora sighed, pulling her hand back. "You are just like your grandmother. Stubborn, cold." She walked to the door. "Please, Vivian, for me, just let it go." She left, leaving the scent of her floral perfume hanging in the stale air of my apartment. I locked the door and leaned against it, closing my eyes. I felt a crack in my chest, a hairline fracture in the resolve I had been building for weeks. Stubborn, cold, helper. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just jealous. Maybe I was the villain in this story. Then I saw the envelope on the floor. It must have been slid under the door while I was arguing with my mother. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with the Alderwick Systems logo embossed in gold in the corner. Certified mail. I picked it up. My hands were trembling again. I tore it open. It was a formal letter, on the stationery of the office of the CEO. To Vivian Hayes, Director of Operations. From the Office of the Executive Transition Committee. Subject: Restriction of Administrative Privileges, effective immediately. Your access to the Level 4 financial directories, including vendor procurement, executive payroll, and strategic planning, has been revoked pending a review of data security protocols. This action is being taken to ensure the integrity of sensitive information during the transition period. It was signed with a stamp, Malcolm Larkin, CEO, but underneath the stamp, there were initials in blue ink, G.H. Grant. He knew. He had seen the logs of me accessing the system. He knew I was hunting, and he had just cut the lights. I stood in the middle of my living room, the letter crumpling in my fist, the fracture in my chest sealed shut. The heat of the anger turned into something colder, harder, ice. He thought this was a checkmate. He thought that by blinding me, he had stopped me. He didn't know I had already printed the logs. He didn't know I had the copy of the Copperline contract. He didn't know that I had Marston Pell ready to write a check, and he didn't know that by cutting me off, He had just given me the one thing I needed to convince the minority shareholders that the company was being run by a tyrant. I walked over to my desk, picked up the phone, and dialed Dana Rowe. It went to voicemail. "Dana," I said, my voice steady and low. "It is Vivian. He locked me out. It has started. Do not export anything else from the server. It is too dangerous." I paused, looking at the city lights blinking outside my window. "Just keep your head down. I'm going to get the rest of what we need the hard way." I hung up. I looked at the senior operations manager draft announcement I had taped to my wall. I ripped it down, balled it up, and threw it in the trash. The quiet audit was over. The war was now open. The morning after my access was revoked. I did not storm into Grant's office. I did not call Malcolm in a panic. I sat at my desk, my hands folded on top of the sleek, cold surface, and I stared at the gray dialog box on my monitor. Access denied. Contact administrator. Grant expected me to fight. He expected the emotional explosion he had been predicting to the board, the volatility that would prove his point that I was too fragile for leadership. He wanted me to bang on his door and demand my permissions back so he could look at me with pity and tell me to calm down. I refused to give him the show. Instead, I opened my email client, which, thankfully, still worked, and drafted a message to the head of IT, copying the entire compliance department and, crucially, the external auditors. Subject: clarification on access. Restriction protocol. Dear IT team, I have received notice of a restriction on my access to the financial directories. Please confirm in writing the specific security breach that triggered this protocol, the date of the alleged incident, and the expected timeline for the review. As Director of Operations, I must ensure this does not delay the upcoming federal compliance audit. I await your formal report. It was a trap. There was no security breach. There was no incident. By demanding a formal explanation in writing, I was forcing them to either lie on the record, which was a crime, or admit that the restriction was arbitrary and executive in nature. I was creating a paper trail of obstruction. While I typed, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Dana Rowe. I got the archives. Everything prior to 2024 is on an encrypted drive. They forgot to lock out the backup server mirror. I am wiping my logs now. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. Grant had locked the front door, but he had forgotten that I was the one who had installed the windows. With my access to the live financial data cut, I turned my attention to the only place I could still look: the physical archives, down in the basement of the Alderwick building. Past the humming server racks and the janitorial supplies, there was a room filled with filing cabinets that smelled of dust and old toner. These were the records from before we went fully digital. Grant thought they were trash. I knew they were history, and history has a nasty habit of coming back to haunt you. I spent 3 nights down there, under the flickering fluorescent light. I told the security guard I was looking for old schematics for the facility management team. I found something better. I found the original warranty agreements for the Atlas hardware integration we had sold 5 years ago. It was a massive government contract, the one that had put Alderwick on the map, at the time, to close the deal against a larger competitor. Malcolm had agreed to an extended, 10-year comprehensive warranty. I pulled the contract. Clause 17. Alderwick Systems guarantees full hardware replacement and on-site labor for a period of 10 years. Regardless of manufacturer defect, I ran the numbers in my head. We had ceased manufacturing the Atlas units 2 years ago. The third-party supplier had gone out of business. If those units failed, and they were reaching the end of their life cycle, we would have to engineer a custom solution from scratch for every single failure. It was a liability exposure of potentially $4 million. I checked the digital accounting records I had saved before the lockout. There was no accrual for this. No reserve fund. The warranty obligation had been forgotten when we migrated to the new ERP system 3 years ago. $4 million was not enough to bankrupt the company, but it was enough to wipe out our projected profit for the next 2 years. It was a material fact that had to be disclosed to any potential partner or buyer. If Grant signed a deal claiming the company was debt-free and stable, And this warranty came to light. It wouldn't just be a mistake, it would be securities fraud. I photocopied the document. I held the warm paper in my hands, feeling the weight of it. It was a small thing, a few paragraphs of legalese. But in the right hands, at the right moment, it was a grenade. Upstairs, the company was changing. It was subtle at first, then aggressive. Grant launched his rebrand initiative on a Monday. Workers arrived to find the lobby stripped of the old, warm mahogany panels, replaced by stark, white minimalist furniture that looked uncomfortable and cheap. The classic Alderwick shipwheel logo was gone, replaced by a vague, abstract blue triangle that looked like every other tech startup in the district. And then the consultants arrived. They were from Copperline, young men in ill-fitting suits who spoke in a language that made my teeth ache. They didn't talk about shipping code or fixing bugs. They talked about optics, velocity, and paradigm shifts. They set up camp in the main conference room. Covering the glass walls with sticky notes, I walked past the engineering pit and saw the morale draining out of the room like water from a cracked tub. The developers, men and women who had built this platform with their bare hands, were being pulled into mandatory culture alignment workshops where they were told their old methods were legacy blockers. Tom, the lead engineer who had spoken to me earlier, stopped me by the water cooler. He looked exhausted. "They want us to stop patching the core server." "Vivian," he whispered, looking over his shoulder at a Copperline consultant who was loudly typing on a laptop nearby. "Stop patching it?" I asked. "That is dangerous. If we miss a security update, the client data is vulnerable. Grant says it is a waste of resources." Tom said, "He wants us to focus on the new dashboard interface. He says the investors buy the dashboard, not the back end. He says we need Flash." I looked at the consultant. He was maybe 25, typing furiously, probably writing an invoice for more than Tom made in a month. "Do the patches." "Tom," I said quietly. "I can't," he replied, his voice breaking. "They revoked my admin rights to the production server. Only Copperline has deployment authority now." I felt a chill go down my spine. Grant wasn't just painting the house. He was removing the support beams to make room for better wallpaper. "Document it," I said. "Send an email confirming you were instructed to skip the security patches. Print the email, keep it at home." Tom nodded and walked away. I watched him go, realizing that Grant wasn't just risking money, he was risking the integrity of everything we had built. The board preparation session was held on a rainy Wednesday. Since I was technically still the director of operations, albeit a hobbled one, I was required to attend. The room was full. Elaine Mercer sat at the head of the table, looking polished and impatient. Grant stood at the front, next to a large monitor displaying the new blue triangle logo. "We are entering a new era," Grant said, his voice booming with practiced charisma. "The market rewards boldness. For too long. Alderwick has been reactive. We have been playing not to lose. Now, we are going to play to win." He clicked a slide. It showed a hockey stick growth chart that was so optimistic it bordered on fiction. Elaine nodded approvingly. "I like the aggression. Grant, the numbers look promising." I raised my hand. The room went silent. Grant suppressed a sigh. "Yes. Vivian, I am looking at the OPEX projections," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You have cut the maintenance budget by 30% to fund the rebranding." "That is correct," Grant said, smiling like a teacher correcting a slow student. "We are reallocating capital to high-impact areas, but the maintenance budget covers the warranty obligations." I said, "Specifically the Tier 3 legacy contracts. If we cut that support, we risk defaulting on the government SLAs." Grant chuckled. He looked at the board members. "See? This is what I was telling you." He turned to me, his expression full of exaggerated patience. "Vivian is brilliant. Really. She knows every line of code in the building, but she is rigid. She sees a budget line and sees a wall. I see a budget line and see a suggestion." He looked back at the board. "We are moving away from hardware support. Vivian, that is the old model. We are a software company now. The legacy contracts will be phased out. You are worrying about problems that don't exist anymore." I saw Elaine Mercer nod. I saw two other board members exchange a look, not of concern, but of recognition. They had heard this before. "Vivian is brilliant but rigid." Grant had been priming them with this phrase for months. Every time I raised a legitimate risk, he had framed it as my inability to see the vision. I was speaking a language of facts, and he was speaking a language of feelings. In a boardroom terrified of stagnation, feelings were winning. I sat back in my chair. I did not argue. I did not mention the $4 million liability I had found in the basement, not yet. If I dropped the bomb now, Grant would just spin it. He would say I was digging up ancient history to stall progress. I needed a bigger gun. After the meeting, I went to Dana's office. She was staring at her laptop, her face pale. "Close the door," she said. I clicked it shut. "What is it?" Dana turned her screen toward me. It was a slide deck, but it wasn't one of ours. It was a pitch deck for a company called Vanguard Logistics. They were our biggest competitor. "Look at the data on slide 12, Dana said. I leaned in. It was a chart showing Alderwick's client retention rates, broken down by region and sector. It was proprietary data. It was data that we had never released publicly. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "A friend at Vanguard sent it to me," Dana said. "He asked me if we were shopping the company. He said this deck has been circulating among the private equity firms in Boston." I looked closer at the slide. In the bottom right corner, barely visible, there was a faint, gray alphanumeric string. It was a printer serialization code. I pulled a magnifying glass from Dana's desk drawer, she kept it for reading fine print on contracts, and held it up to the screen. 04-22-Larkin-exec-01. It was the serialization code for the printer in Grant's home office. "Grant is not just looking for a partnership," I said, my voice cold. "He is shopping the company. He is leaking our internal weaknesses to our competitors to drive the valuation down, so a buyer can swoop in cheap." "Why?" Dana asked. "Why devalue his own inheritance?" "Because of the success fee." I realized, the contract with Copperline, the kickback. If he sells the company quickly, he gets the 2% fee immediately. If he builds the company, it takes years to see that kind of money. He doesn't want to run Alderwick. Dana, he wants to flip it. He is stripping the copper wiring out of the walls and selling it for scrap before anyone realizes the house is falling down. Dana took off her glasses. "This is corporate espionage. Vivian, this is a breach of fiduciary duty. It is only espionage if we can prove he sent it." I said, "And right now, all we have is a printer code and a suspicion." I stood up. "I need legal counsel, not the company lawyers. I need a shark." Sloan Park's office was in downtown Briarhaven, in a glass tower that looked down on the rest of the city like a judge on a bench. Sloan was a legend in employment law and corporate litigation. She was known for being expensive, ruthless, and entirely devoid of sentimentality. She sat across from me, listening as I laid out the timeline, the demotion, the access restriction, the Copperline kickback, the leaked data. When I finished, she didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "You are acting like a sister." "Miss Hayes," she said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air. "Excuse me?" "You are hurt," she said. "You are offended. You are trying to prove that you are the good child, and he is the bad child. You are collecting evidence to show your father so he will pat you on the head and say you were right." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "That is a losing strategy. The law does not care about your family dynamic. The law cares about damages. The law cares about equity." She picked up the file I had brought. "You need to stop thinking like a sibling in a feud and start thinking like an owner in waiting. You are not protecting the company for your father. You are protecting your future asset." She opened the file to the Copperline contract. "This success fee? This is your leverage. But you can't just wave it around. You need a witness. Documents can be forged. Metadata can be explained away. You need a human being who can stand up in a deposition and say, I was told to do this. I thought of Maribel Knox, the admin assistant. I have a potential witness. I said, but she is terrified. Then buy her safety. Sloan said, we draft a whistleblower protection agreement. We guarantee her employment or a severance package from the holding company you are forming. We make it safer for her to talk than to stay silent. Sloan closed the file. And Vivian? Stop asking for permission to lead. Taking power is not polite. It is usually quite rude. If you want this company, you are going to have to break your brother's career. Are you ready to do that? I thought of Grant's smile. I thought of the way he had looked at the board and called me rigid. I thought of the employees he was lying to. Yes, I said. I found Maribel in the parking garage. It was 6 o'clock, and she was walking to her car. Her shoulders hunched. Maribel. I called out softly. She jumped, dropping her keys. Vivian, you scared me. I picked up her keys and handed them to her. I am sorry. I didn't want to talk in the building. She looked around nervously. I can't be seen talking to you. Vivian. Grant said you are on a disciplinary track. I know what he said. Maribel, I stepped closer. I also know that you are the one editing the calendar invites, and I know you are the one routing the Copperline approvals through the fast-track channel. Maribel's face went white. I didn't steal anything. He told me to. He gave me his password. He said it was just administrative cleanup. I know. I said gently. I know you didn't mean to do anything wrong. But Maribel, what you are doing, it is fraud. And when the audit happens, and it will happen, Grant is not going to take the blame. He is going to say you acted alone. He is going to say you used his password without permission. Maribel started to cry, silent tears tracking down her cheeks. He said he would fire me if I didn't do it. I have student loans. Vivian, I can't lose this job. I reached into my bag and pulled out the card Sloan Park had given me. You are not going to lose your job. I am working with a lawyer. If you provide a sworn statement detailing exactly what Grant instructed you to do, cleaning the calendars, the emails, the approvals, we can protect you. We can grant you whistleblower status. I pressed the card into her hand. But you have to choose. Maribel, you can protect the man who will throw you under the bus the second it becomes convenient. Or you can help me stop him. She looked at the card, then at me. Her hands were shaking, but she nodded. He made me delete the meeting with Vanguard. She whispered, the one from last week. He told me to wipe it from the server logs. Vanguard. I repeated, the competitor. He met with their CEO. Maribel said, at the airport hotel. He told me to list it as dental appointment. I felt a surge of adrenaline. It was confirmation. He was selling us out. Call the number on the card. Maribel. Tonight? The next morning? I sat in the back of the small cafe near the Common again. Marston Pell was there, drinking his tea. We are ready to move on the minority shareholders. I said. Marston nodded. The offer letters are drafted. We are offering 15% above market value. It is a generous premium. It is necessary. I said, I need you to reach out to Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Clark. They hold 7% each. They are loyal to your father. Marston warned. They might hesitate to sell to a holding company they don't know. Tell them the truth. I said, tell them that Seawick Harbor Partners is aware of a material liability that the current management has failed to disclose. Tell them that the company is carrying a $4 million warranty debt that isn't on the books, and that leadership is currently stripping assets. Marston raised an eyebrow. You want to scare them? I want to give them a way out. I said, if they hold the stock, they risk losing everything when the audit hits. If they sell to us now, they get a premium and a clean exit. And the condition? The condition is that they assign their proxy voting rights to Seawick Harbor immediately upon signing. I said. Marston smiled. A thin, dry expression. You really are your father's daughter. Vivian. He used the same tactic to buy out the original partners in '98. I am not my father. I said, he built this company. I am just trying to keep it from burning down. Make the calls. Marston. I returned to the office just after lunch. The atmosphere was brittle. People were whispering in clumps. falling silent when I walked by. I went to the conference room to retrieve a notebook I had left after the board prep. Grant was there. He was sitting at the head of the table, alone, staring at the empty chairs. He didn't look up when I entered. "You are making calls," he said. His voice was soft, devoid of the usual bluster. "I don't know what you mean," I said, picking up my notebook. "Don't play dumb. Viv, it doesn't suit you. I had a call from Mrs. Clark. She said a private equity firm approached her, asking about undisclosed liabilities." He swiveled his chair to face me. His eyes were cold. "You are trying to torch the valuation, aren't you? You can't have the toy, so you are going to break it so no one else wants it. I am trying to ensure that our shareholders are informed. Grant, unlike you, I don't treat them like idiots." Grant stood up. He walked around the table until he was standing in front of me. He was taller than me, and he used that height now, looming over me in a way that was meant to be intimidating. "You can't win this, Vivian," he said quietly. He leaned in close. "Look at you. You are exhausted. You are alone. You have no friends in this building. The board thinks you are hysterical. Mom thinks you are having a breakdown." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "People like you don't get chosen. Viv, you are the worker bee. You are the one who cleans up the mess. You are not the one who sits in the chair. You never were. Dad knows it. The board knows it. Why don't you?" The words hit me like a physical blow. People like you don't get chosen. It was the echo of every birthday, every graduation, every dinner table conversation where Grant's charm had outshined my grades. It was the fundamental truth of my childhood. I felt the tears prickling my eyes, the familiar swell of shame and inadequacy. For a second, I wanted to apologize. I wanted to beg him to stop looking at me like I was broken. But then I remembered the warranty in the basement. I remembered Maribel crying in the parking garage. I remembered the printer code on the leaked deck. I swallowed the tears. I forced myself to look him in the eye. "I am not waiting to be chosen anymore. Grant," I said. I turned and walked out of the glass room. I could feel his eyes boring into my back. I made it to my office and closed the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I leaned against the heavy wood, trying to breathe. My phone rang. It was Dana. "Vivian," she said, her voice urgent. "You need to come to my office, now." I ran down the hall. Dana was standing by her window, looking out at the harbor. She turned when I entered. "I just got off the phone with Elaine Mercer's assistant," Dana said. "And? Malcolm is coming in tomorrow morning," she said. 8 o'clock. "Why?" "Grant has called an emergency signing session," Dana said. "He told Malcolm that the market is shifting and they need to lock in the new structure immediately to protect the stock price. They are signing the strategic partnership addendum," I said, realizing what it meant. "Yes," Dana said. "And once Malcolm signs that, it gives Grant full power of attorney over the company's operations for 5 years. It makes him irremovable without a supermajority vote of the board. If he signs that tomorrow," I said, "my acquisition plan is dead. We can't buy a controlling interest in a company where the CEO is locked in by contract." "We have 12 hours, Dana said. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 5:30. "Then we have to be ready by 8, I said. I walked to the window and looked out at the fog rolling in over the water. The same fog as the night this started. "Call Sloan," I said. "Tell her to bring the affidavits. Call Marston. Tell him to wire the funds for the minority shares tonight. Conditional or not. We need to show proof of funds." "What are you going to do?" Dana asked. I turned back to her. "I am going to crash the meeting, and I'm going to fire my brother." I arrived at the office at 6:45 in the morning. The sun was just beginning to bruise the horizon over the Atlantic, casting a pale, sickly light across the open-plan floor. The cleaners were still emptying the recycling bins, the wheels of their carts squeaking on the linoleum. I walked straight to the executive conference room. I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the chair directly opposite Malcolm's usual seat, placed a single red folder on the glass table, and waited. The meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock. By 7:45, the participants began to trickle in. First came the lawyers for the company, 2 men in navy suits who checked their watches and spoke in hushed tones about tea times. Then came Elaine Mercer, carrying a venti coffee and looking already exhausted by the day ahead. When Grant walked in at 7:55, guiding Malcolm by the elbow like an invalid, the room was already tense. Grant stopped when he saw me. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, and his hair was perfectly coiffed, but his eyes narrowed instantly. "Vivian," he said, his voice dripping with a condescending sweetness, "you are not on the invite list for this session. This is a closed governance meeting." I did not move. I did not stand up. I kept my hands folded on the table. "I am here as a corporate officer to submit a formal risk assessment regarding the pending addendum," I said. My voice was low, steady, and stripped of all inflection. Grant laughed. A short, sharp bark. "We are past the assessment phase. Viv, we are signing today. Malcolm is ready. The board is ready. You need to leave." I looked at Malcolm. He looked older than he had even a few days ago. His skin was gray, and he seemed to be shrinking inside his collar. He looked at me with confusion, his eyes darting between me and Grant. "Vivian?" Malcolm rasped. "Is something wrong?" Grant squeezed Malcolm's shoulder. "Nothing is wrong, Dad. Vivian is just having a hard time letting go. We talked about this. She is emotional about the changes." I opened the red folder. "I am formally requesting a pause in the signing of the Strategic Partnership Addendum pursuant to Article 5 of the Corporate Bylaws, citing undisclosed material liabilities," I said. I pulled out the photocopy of the warranty agreement I had found in the basement. Grant rolled his eyes. "This is ridiculous. Elaine, can we please proceed? We have a schedule." Elaine Mercer looked at me, then at the document in my hand. "What liability?" "Vivian?" "The Atlas hardware warranty." I said. I slid the paper across the glass. It made a dry, hissing sound. Clause 17. Alderwick Systems is liable for full hardware replacement on the government sector units for 10 years. We have no reserve fund for this. The failure rate on those units is climbing. The projected exposure is $4 million over the next 18 months. The room went silent. One of the lawyers picked up the paper, adjusting his glasses. Grant scoffed. "That is ancient history. We don't even make that hardware anymore." "That is exactly the point," I said, turning my gaze to him. "We don't make it, so if we have to replace it, we have to engineer it from scratch. It is $4 million of unallocated debt. If Malcolm signs a document today stating the company is solvent and debt-free, he is committing securities fraud." I saw the lawyer stiffen. He looked at Grant. "Is this true?" the lawyer asked. Grant waved his hand dismissively. "It is a rounding error. Vivian is blowing up a minor clause to sabotage the deal because she is resentful. She is trying to hold the company hostage because she wasn't picked for the varsity team." He leaned over the table, his face flushing slightly. "You are pathetic. Vivian, you are digging through trash in the basement to find reasons to say no. This is why you can't lead. You are obsessed with problems instead of solutions." I saw the vice president of sales look down at his notepad. Afraid to meet my eyes, the narrative Grant had spun, that I was the bitter, unhinged sister, was powerful. But facts are stubborn things. I am not the only one with concerns, I said. The door opened. Dana Rowe walked in. She looked terrified, but she walked with a purpose. She carried a tablet connected to the room's projector. Without asking for permission, she plugged it in. The screen on the wall flickered to life. "What is this?" Grant demanded. Standing up, "This is an ambush. It is a timeline," Dana said, her voice shaking slightly. The screen showed a graph. It tracked the fast-track approval codes for Copperline Consulting against the standard procurement cycle. "These are the vendor approvals for the rebranding initiative," Dana said. "Every single one was approved outside of standard business hours. Every single one bypassed the compliance filter." Grant slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. This is insubordination. I want both of you out of this room. Security, sit down." "Grant," Elaine Mercer said. Her voice was not loud, but it had the weight of a gavel. Grant froze. He looked at Elaine, his mouth open. Elaine was looking at the screen. "What am I looking at?" Dana? You are looking at a pattern, Dana said, and you are looking at this. She clicked to the next slide. It was the contract clause for the success fee, 2% of the gross valuation, payable upon a change in control. Dana read, "This contract was signed by Grant Hayes on behalf of Alderwick Systems. The counterparty is Copperline Consulting. If this addendum is signed today, granting Grant executive control, it triggers this payment immediately." The room shifted. I could feel the physical change in the air pressure. The lawyers were no longer checking their watches. They were checking their files. The board members who had been nodding along with Grant's vision were now doing the mental math on a $2 million payout. Grant's face had gone pale, but he recovered quickly. He was a salesman. After all, standard incentive structure, he said, smoothing his tie. It is a finder's fee for the consultants who helped structure the transition. It is industry standard. For a third-party firm? Elaine asked sharply. Payable immediately? Malcolm let out a low, confused sound. He was looking at the screen, squinting. Grant? Malcolm asked. What is Copperline? Grant turned to him, his voice softening instantly. It is just a vendor, Dad. Don't worry about the details. It is just part of the modernization. I stood up then. I walked around the table until I was standing next to Malcolm. I did not look at Grant. I looked at my father. Malcolm, I said gently. I knelt down so I was at eye level with him. Grant is not protecting you. He is selling the furniture while you are still living in the house. Malcolm looked at me. His eyes were watery, swimming with confusion and fear. He said I had to sign to save the company. Malcolm whispered. He said we were in trouble. We are not in trouble. I said, taking his hand. We are strong, but we have to be honest. And this contract? This isn't honest. Grant lunged forward. Don't you touch him. You are poisoning him against his own son. Elaine Mercer stood up. That is enough. She looked around the room, her face grim. We are not signing anything today. But Elaine, Grant started. I said no. Grant, she snapped. She looked at the lawyers. We have a potential undisclosed liability regarding the warranty, and we have a significant conflict of interest regarding this vendor contract. We need a full audit before we proceed with any leadership transition. She looked at me. Her eyes were cold, calculating. She didn't like me. I was the disruption. But she respected risk. We will reconvene in 48 hours, and not here. The atmosphere in this building is toxic. We will meet at the Ashford Glen Conference Center on Friday morning. An emergency session of the full board. She began packing her bag. Until then, all executive authority remains with the current structure. No addendums, no payouts, and for God's sake, someone turn off that projector. The victory was temporary, and it tasted like copper. I went back to my office, my hands shaking as the adrenaline crashed. I had stopped the signing. But I hadn't won the war. I had just bought 2 days. My phone rang. It was Marston Pell. I heard what happened. Marston said, "News travels fast." He didn't sound impressed. "You bought time. Vivian, but you didn't kill the deal. Grant is already spinning this. I just had lunch with a partner at a different firm. The rumor is that you staged a dramatic intervention to humiliate your brother. They are saying you are unstable. I found $4 million in debt and a kickback scheme." "Marston," I said, rubbing my temples. "You found a warranty clause and a consulting fee." Marston corrected. "Grant can explain those away. He will say the warranty is covered by insurance, even if it isn't. He will lie until the ink is dry. He will say the consulting fee was approved by a previous budget committee." He paused. "I need more. Vivian. I am holding the wire transfer for the minority shares. I can't release $10 million of my client's money based on a warranty dispute. I need a smoking gun. I need proof of fraud." I closed my eyes. I thought of Maribel Knox. I have a witness. I said, "Grant's assistant. She can testify that he ordered her to forge approvals and delete meeting logs with competitors. Then use her." Marston said, "If I use her, Grant will destroy her." I said, "She is 24. He will sue her for breach of confidentiality. He will blacklist her. Marston's voice was cold. You want to be the CEO. Vivian, CEOs make casualties. If you are not willing to burn a pawn to take the king, then tell me now, and I will pull the funding. I looked at the receiver. I hated him in that moment. I hated the game. I will get you the leverage, I said. By the afternoon, the atmosphere in the office had shifted from tense to hostile. Grant was not hiding anymore. He was on the warpath. I went to the break room to get coffee, and 3 people stopped talking the moment I entered. They looked at their phones, avoiding my gaze. I heard he is calling for an investigation. One of them whispered as I walked away, into her data access. I returned to my desk to find an email waiting for me. Subject: Mandatory Compliance Meeting from Human Resources. Time: 3 o'clock. Location: HR Director's Office. It was not a request. Grant was moving faster than I expected. He was trying to discredit me before the Friday board meeting. If he could pin a compliance violation on me, unauthorized data pulls, breach of privacy, he could argue to the board that my risk assessment was fruit of the poisonous tree. I picked up my phone and dialed Sloan Park. I am being summoned to HR. I said, put me on speaker. Sloan said, do not say a word until I'm on the line. And Vivian? Record it. The HR director, a woman named Janice who usually spent her days organizing birthday cards and benefits enrollment, looked pale and sweaty. Sitting next to her was the company's internal counsel, a man named Miller who was one of Grant's golf buddies. Vivian, have a seat, Janice said, her voice trembling. I sat down. I placed my phone on the desk. Face up. I have my legal counsel, Sloan Park, on the line. I said. Miller frowned. That is not necessary. Vivian, this is an internal employee matter. Sloan's voice cut through the speaker, sharp as a razor. It is absolutely necessary. Mr. Miller, given the hostile work environment my client has documented, any disciplinary conversation will be conducted with counsel present. Proceed. Miller shifted in his chair. Vivian, we have received reports of unauthorized access to executive file directories. Miller said, specifically, the downloading of sensitive vendor contracts and private calendar logs. This is a violation of the acceptable use policy. Which policy? I asked. Miller blinked. The standard policy. I want the specific article. I said, and I want the evidence of the unauthorized access. Show me the logs. Show me the timestamps. We are investigating the logs. Miller said, but given the severity of the allegations, we are placing you on administrative leave pending the outcome. You will need to surrender your badge and laptop. It was a setup. If they took my laptop, they took my evidence. If they walked me out of the building, I couldn't attend the Friday meeting. Sloan spoke up. If you place my client on leave without presenting the evidence of the infraction, we will file an immediate injunction for retaliation under the Whistleblower Protection Act. Miller scoffed. Whistleblower? She is just snooping. My client has submitted a formal report to the board regarding financial irregularities. Sloan said, any action taken against her employment status within 90 days of that report is automatically presumed to be retaliatory under Massachusetts state law. If you take her badge today, Mr. Miller, I will have a lawsuit on your desk by 5 o'clock that names you personally for aiding and abetting corporate malfeasance. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Janice looked at Miller. She looked terrified. She knew that Grant was pushing this, but she also knew that if it blew up, she would be the one fired. We are just following protocol, Janice stammered. Then follow the protocol that requires due process. Sloan snapped. Provide the evidence in writing. Until then, my client returns to her desk. Miller stared at the phone. He knew he was beaten. He didn't have the logs because the unauthorized access was me doing my job before Grant locked me out. Fine, Miller spat, but the investigation continues. I stood up. I picked up my phone. I will wait for your email. Janice, I said. I walked out of the office. My legs were shaking, but my head was high. I had survived the ambush. I needed the final piece. I needed to know where the money was going. I went back to my desk and pulled up the file on Copperline. I had the contract. I had the success fee clause, but I needed to link the payment destination to Grant. The contract listed the payee for the success fee as a holding company, Blue Meridian, LLC. I had searched for Blue Meridian before, but it was a shell. No employees, no website, just a mailing address. Unit 404, 112 Harborview Drive, Briarhaven, MA. I pulled up Google Maps. 112 Harborview Drive was a self-storage facility. Briarhaven Secure Storage. I stared at the screen. Why did that address feel familiar? I closed my eyes, digging through 20 years of memories. Grant's failed ventures, the investment properties he tried to buy, the band he started in college. The band. Grant had played bass in a terrible cover band in his 20s. They had too much gear to keep in his apartment. He had rented a unit. I opened my personal email archive. Not the work one. I searched for Grant and Bill, 10 years ago. An email from Grant to me, when he was traveling in Europe and forgot to pay his bills. Subject: Can you cover this for me? Body: Viv, totally forgot the storage unit bill. Can you drop a check off? They are going to auction my amps if I don't pay by Friday. It's the place on Harborview. Unit 404. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning. Unit 404. He hadn't even bothered to get a new unit. He was using the same storage unit he had kept for a decade to register the shell company that would receive the kickback. He was routing a $2 million fraud payment to a mailbox that he paid for with his personal credit card. I printed the old email. I printed the Copperline contract showing the address. This was it. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was money laundering. This was undeniable proof that Grant Hayes was stealing from the company. I sat in my office as the sun went down. The cleaners were back, their carts squeaking. I had the evidence. I had the witness. Maribel was meeting with Sloan tonight to sign the affidavit. I had the financing. Marston had agreed to wire the funds once I showed him the storage unit connection. I had everything I needed to destroy my brother. My computer screen glowed in the twilight. On it was the final purchase agreement from Seawick Harbor Partners. It was a document that would transfer ownership of the minority shares to me. It included the clauses that would trigger the hostile takeover. It included the debt assumption. If I signed this, I wasn't just stopping Grant. I was buying Alderwick. I was buying the $4 million warranty liability. I was buying the shattered employee morale. I was buying the crumbling server infrastructure. I was buying the legal mess with Copperline. I was buying the fact that my father would never speak to me again. I was buying the fact that my mother would look at me with that disappointed, fearful gaze for the rest of her life. I hovered the cursor over the digital signature field. I thought about Grant's voice. People like you don't get chosen. He was right. People like me didn't get chosen. We had to choose ourselves, and we had to be willing to live with the ashes of what we burned down to get there. I clicked, document signed. The screen flashed green, then returned to the static desktop background. I sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the empty building. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the heavy, suffocating pressure of the ocean floor. I owned it, all of it. Now I just had to survive the eviction. The digital signature on the purchase agreement was just a collection of pixels, a green checkmark that appeared on my screen at 7:42 in the evening. It was anticlimactic. There was no thunderclap, no sudden shift in the Earth's axis. There was just the quiet hum of my laptop fan and the sound of my own breathing in the darkened office. But in the invisible world of finance, the tectonic plates had shifted. Marston Pell moved with the silent efficiency of a predator. Within an hour of my signature, the wire transfers were initiated. Seawick Harbor Partners, the faceless entity I now controlled, executed the buy orders we had staged over the last 48 hours. We didn't buy everything at once. That would have triggered a trading halt or a panic. We bought the blocks. First, the 14% held by the Henderson estate. Then, the 12% from Mrs. Clark, who had been all too happy to liquidate her position after Marston whispered about undisclosed liabilities. Then, the smaller, fragmented holdings of 3 other original investors who had long since lost faith in the company's stagnation. By the time the sun rose on Friday morning, Seawick Harbor Partners held 41% of the voting stock of Alderwick Systems. Combined with my own existing shares and the proxy votes I had secured from a few sympathetic senior engineers, I controlled 51.3% of the company. I was the majority, I was the board, I was the law. And nobody in the Ashford Glen Conference Center knew it yet. The conference center was a sprawling, sterile complex of glass and blonde wood, tucked away in the woods 5 miles north of the city. It was the kind of place designed to make unpleasant decisions feel like strategic alignments. The air conditioning was set to a brisk 68 degrees, and the coffee in the urns was weak and lukewarm. I arrived 20 minutes early. I wore a charcoal suit, sharp and unadorned. I carried no bag, only a single leather portfolio containing 3 copies of a bound dossier. Elaine Mercer was already there, pacing the perimeter of the room, on the phone. She looked tired. The tension of the last 2 days had worn through her professional veneer. When she saw me, she snapped her phone shut and nodded, a tight, wary gesture. "Vivian," she said, "I hope you are prepared. Grant has brought outside counsel." I looked at the table. Grant's seat was flanked by 2 strangers in pinstripes. "I brought something better than counsel." "Elaine," I said calmly, "I brought the math." Grant arrived 5 minutes later, helping Malcolm into the room. My father looked ghostly. His movements were brittle, as if his joints were made of glass. Grant, by contrast, was radiating a manic energy. He was smiling too much, shaking hands with the board members with a grip that was a little too firm, laughing a little too loud at jokes no one had made. He saw me and his smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before reassembling itself into a mask of pity. "Morning, Viv," he said, pulling out a chair for Malcolm. "I am surprised you came. After the HR meeting, I thought you might want to take some time to recover." I sat directly across from him. "I'm feeling quite clear-headed. Grant, thank you for your concern." The meeting began with a heavy, suffocating silence. Elaine Mercer called the room to order, her voice echoing slightly off the high ceilings. "We are here to discuss the strategic partnership addendum," Elaine said, and to address the concerns raised by the Director of Operations regarding potential liabilities. She looked at me. "Vivian, you have the floor, and I will remind you, we are on a strict schedule. If this is another emotional outburst about legacy hardware, we will move to a vote immediately." I opened my portfolio. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I slid 1 copy of the dossier to Elaine, 1 to the company's general counsel, and 1 to Malcolm. "This is not about hardware," I said. "This is about the solvency of Alderwick Systems." I pointed to the first tab. "We have spoken about the warranty liability," I continued. "Grant has called it a rounding error, but if you look at page 3, you will see the independent actuary report I commissioned yesterday. The exposure is not $4 million. It is closer to $6 million. Given the current failure rates of the Atlas units," Grant snorted. "You paid an actuary? With whose budget?" I ignored him. "But the warranty is manageable." I said, "We can survive a $6 million hit. What we cannot survive is a contract designed to drain the company of its remaining liquidity while we are bleeding." I turned the page. Tab 2, the Copperline Consulting Agreement. I looked at the board members. You were told this was a standard modernization contract. You were told the success fee was a typical finder's fee. But if you read the language in Clause 14, Section B, you will see that the definition of change in control has been broadened to include internal executive restructuring. I paused, letting the words settle. If Malcolm signs the addendum today, giving Grant managing control, that clause triggers 2% of the gross valuation of the company becomes payable to Copperline immediately. "So what?" Grant interrupted, leaning forward. "It is the cost of doing business. You have to spend money to modernize. Viv, you are thinking like a shopkeeper, not a CEO." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. "The company has cash reserves of $3 million. I said, "If we trigger a $2 million fee today, and the warranty claims begin to arrive next month, we will be insolvent within 90 days. We will miss payroll in October. I turned to the next page. And when we miss payroll, the first people to suffer will not be the people in this room. It will be the 300 engineers and support staff in Briarhaven, the people who built this company. Elaine Mercer was reading the contract. Her brow furrowed. $2 million payable to a consulting firm we have only employed for 3 months? She murmured. She looked up at Grant. This seems aggressive. Grant, even for a restructure. It is a standard incentive, Grant insisted, his voice rising in pitch. Copperline brought the deal to the table. They deserve the fee. Why didn't you speak sooner? Elaine asked, turning to me. Her eyes were sharp. If you knew about this structure, Vivian, why wait until the 11th hour? Why let us get this far down the road? I felt the weight of the question. It was the accusation I had feared most, that I had played with the company's life to time my strike. I took a breath, because the structure of this company rewarded confidence over clarity. I said honestly. The room went quiet. I tried to raise flags about the spending 6 months ago. I was told I was being negative. I tried to audit the vendor list 3 months ago. I was told I was slowing down innovation. The board, and this family, has spent the last year falling in love with a story about growth. Anyone who pointed out the boring, mathematical reality was labeled rigid or difficult. I looked at Malcolm. He was staring at the table, his hand trembling slightly. I didn't speak sooner because I didn't realize how coordinated the effort was to silence me. I said, I thought I was fighting bad habits. I didn't realize I was fighting a smear campaign designed to discredit the only person actually reading the contracts. Grant slammed his hand on the table. This is paranoid nonsense. You are spinning a conspiracy theory because you are jealous. You are trying to humiliate me in front of Dad. Elaine, I said, ignoring him. Tab 3. Elaine turned the page. What is this? She asked. It is a sworn affidavit from Maribel Knox, Grant's executive assistant. I said. Grant went pale. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical injury. It was submitted through her counsel at 8 o'clock this morning. I continued. In it, Ms. Knox details specific instructions she received from Grant Hayes to route approvals through unauthorized channels, to backdate vendor contracts, and to erase calendar entries regarding meetings with our direct competitors. The company's general counsel, a man named Sterling who had been checking his watch earlier, suddenly sat up very straight. The boredom vanished from his face, replaced by the cold, reptilian focus of a lawyer spotting a liability that could end his career. He reached over and took the dossier from Elaine. He read the page in silence. The room held its breath. This alleges intentional fraud, Sterling said, his voice flat, and spoliation of evidence. He looked at Grant. Grant, did you instruct your assistant to alter the server logs? Grant stood up. This is a lie. She is lying. Vivian bribed her. You know how Vivian is. She is manipulative. She coerced a junior employee to sign a fake statement. Sit down, Grant, Sterling said. It wasn't a suggestion. The tone in the room had shifted instantly. It was no longer a board meeting about strategy. It was a containment zone. The board members were shifting in their seats, distancing themselves from Grant physically and psychologically. They were imagining the subpoenas. They were imagining the headlines. Grant looked around the room, realizing he was losing them. He saw the cold eyes of the lawyers. He saw the confusion on Malcolm's face. He turned to me. His eyes were wide, desperate, and wet with rage. You are enjoying this, aren't you? He hissed. I looked at him calmly. No, Grant, I am not. You are, he said, his voice shaking. You have always been jealous. Always. Because I was the one people liked. I was the one who could walk into a room and make friends. You were just the calculator. The robot. He walked toward me, leaning over the table. So now you are going to ruin the company just to prove you are smarter than me? You are buying love with money. Vivian, that is all this is. You think if you save the business, Dad will finally love you more than he loves me. I felt the old familiar sting. the ancient wound of childhood. The little sister watching the golden boy get the applause while she did the homework. It rose up in my throat, a hot lump of guilt and shame. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am just hurting him because I want to be the favorite. I looked at Malcolm. He was watching us, his eyes filled with a terrible sorrow. I took a breath. I pushed the guilt down. I crushed it under the weight of the facts. This isn't about you being loved. Grant, I said softly. I gestured to the dossier. This is about the fact that you are stealing from us. I turned to the final tab. Tab 4. I said, the success fee is payable to a company called Blue Meridian LLC. The address for that LLC is Unit 404, Briarhaven Secure Storage. I looked at Grant. It is your old storage unit. Grant, the one you have rented since 2015. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Grant opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the lawyers, then at Elaine, but no one would meet his eyes. Then, a voice spoke from the end of the table. Grant? It was Malcolm. He had pushed himself up in his chair. His voice was stronger than it had been in months. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at his son. Is it true? Malcolm asked. Dad. Look, it is complicated. Grant stammered, his polish cracking, revealing the panicked child underneath. The structure required a separate entity for tax purposes. It is standard asset protection. I was going to... Do you benefit? Malcolm interrupted. The question hung in the air. Simple. Binary. Grant hesitated. His eyes darted around the room. I mean, eventually, the value would accrue to the partners. So in a sense, yes or no? Grant? Malcolm said. Grant froze. He looked at his father, and for the first time, I saw the realization hit him. The charm wouldn't work. The smile wouldn't work. The story wouldn't work. No, Grant shouted. Too fast. Too loud. No, I don't. It is for the consultants. The lie was so obvious, so desperate, that it was physically painful to witness. Malcolm stared at him. He stared at him for a long time. Then, he closed his eyes. He let out a long, shuddering breath and slumped back in his chair. That silence landed harder than any scream. It was the sound of a father's heart breaking. Sterling, the lawyer, cleared his throat. Given the gravity of these documents, he said, his voice clipped, I advise the board to suspend the signing of the addendum immediately pending a full forensic audit. That won't be necessary. I said. Everyone turned to me. Why not? Elaine asked. Because the addendum requires the consent of the majority shareholder. I said. Elaine frowned. Malcolm is the majority shareholder, and he is clearly not in a state to... No. I said. He isn't. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out one final document. It was a single sheet of paper, notarized and stamped. As of 7 o'clock this morning, Seawick Harbor Partners has acquired a controlling interest in Alderwick Systems, holding 51.3% of the voting stock. I placed the document on top of the pile. I am the sole managing partner of Seawick Harbor. I looked around the table. I own the company, and I am formally halting the partnership addendum. Grant stared at me. His mouth hung open. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. You bought it? He whispered. I bought the debt. I said, I bought the liability, and I bought the future. I turned to Elaine. I am calling for an immediate vote to suspend Grant Hayes from all executive duties, effective immediately, pending the investigation into the embezzlement of corporate funds via the Blue Meridian Shell Company. Elaine looked at the share registry document. She looked at the affidavit. She looked at Grant, who was now leaning against the wall, looking like he might vomit. She raised her hand. I second the motion, she said quietly. All in favor? I asked. Every hand in the room went up, even Malcolm's. He didn't look up. He just raised his shaking hand, tears streaming silently down his face. The ride back to Briarhaven was a blur. I sat in the back of a town car, my phone buzzing incessantly in my pocket. Word had leaked. Of course it had. In a company like Alderwick, Secrets traveled faster than fiber optics. The texts were coming in from the managers, from the engineers, from the sales team. Is it true? Did Grant get escorted out? Who is Seawick Harbor? I didn't answer them. I watched the city skyline approach, the gray buildings rising out of the fog. When I arrived at the headquarters, the mood was electric. As I walked through the glass doors, the lobby was eerily quiet. The receptionist stopped typing. The security guard, Henry, stood up straighter than I had ever seen him. "Good afternoon, Miss Hayes," he said. "Or is it Ms. C.E.O. now?" "Just Vivian." "Henry," I said. I walked toward the elevators. The glass walls of the conference rooms were lined with faces. People were standing, watching me. I saw relief in some eyes. Tom, the engineer, looked like he wanted to cheer. I saw fear in others, the sales guys who had been toasting with Grant at the bar, wondering if their jobs were next. They were watching me differently. I wasn't Vivian, the operations director who fixed the printer and nagged about timesheets. I was the person who had just decapitated the king. I was the person who had bought the building. Power changes always mean someone will pay. And they were all wondering if the bill was coming to their desk. I got into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, shutting out the staring faces, my phone vibrated one last time. It wasn't a question from an employee. It was a text from Grant. I stared at the screen. "You think this ends me? You just bought my problem." I looked at the words. He was right, in a way. I had bought the problem. I had bought the broken contracts, the fraudulent fees, the demoralized staff, and the crushing expectation to fix it all. But as the elevator rose, lifting me toward the office that was now mine, I realized something else. I hadn't just bought his problem, I had bought the power to solve it. I put the phone in my pocket and waited for the doors to open. Saturday morning in the corporate world is usually a time of silence, a vacuum where the air conditioning hums to an empty room. But this Saturday was different. The atrium of Alderwick Systems was vibrating with the low-frequency rumble of 300 people whispering at once. Grant had called the meeting at 6 a.m. via a mass text blast to every personal number in the employee directory. His message had been short, manic, and terrifyingly confident. "Emergency all hands. 9 a.m. The future is here." I stood at the back of the atrium, hidden in the shadow of the mezzanine overhang. Dana Rowe stood to my left, her face pale but set in a grim line. To my right stood Sloan Park, my outside counsel, and two uniformed security officers who looked uncomfortable holding clipboards. We watched Grant. He was standing on the raised platform in the center of the room, a microphone in his hand. He wasn't wearing a tie. He had rolled up his sleeves, adopting the casual, approachable look of a tech visionary. He was pacing, energized, feeding off the anxiety in the room like a vampire feeds on blood. "I know there have been rumors," Grant shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "I know you have heard whispers about board votes and legal threats, but I am here to tell you the truth." He paused for effect, scanning the crowd. "The truth is that change scares people. It scares the old guard. It scares the people who are comfortable with mediocrity. Yesterday, there was a push to stop our momentum. There was a push to drag us back into the past." He pointed a finger at the ceiling, as if accusing God himself, but I refused to let that happen. I have secured the backing of the key stakeholders who believe in growth. I am the new managing partner, and as of this morning, we are moving forward with the Copperline integration. There was a scattering of applause. It was thin, nervous clapping from the junior sales team and the consultants who were desperate to keep their contracts, the engineers, the operations staff, the people who actually knew how the company worked. They stood with their arms crossed, looking confused. They knew about the suspension vote. The leak had been total. They were watching a man claim a crown that had already been melted down. I turned to Sloan. "Is he done?" I whispered. "Not yet," Sloan said, checking her watch. "Let him dig the hole. If you interrupt him now, it looks like a squabble. Let him claim total authority. Then the fall is absolute." I waited. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt entirely separate from the cold calm of my mind. "So let the lawyers argue," Grant roared, his voice cracking slightly. "Let the naysayers file their paperwork, while they are reading fine print. We are going to be building. I am not going anywhere. I am Alderwick." He threw his arms out wide, basking in the spotlight. The applause started again, slightly louder this time, driven by sheer confusion. People didn't know who to believe, so they clapped for the man with the microphone. Now, I stepped forward. I walked out of the shadows and into the harsh light of the atrium. I did not run. I did not shout. I walked with the steady, relentless cadence of a ticking clock. Dana and Sloane flanked me, a phalanx of black suits against the casual Saturday denim of the crowd. The sound of my heels on the polished concrete cut through the applause. Heads turned. The clapping died out, rippling away into silence as people saw me. Grant saw me last. He was looking up at the skylight, smiling. When the silence hit, he looked down. His smile froze. It didn't disappear. It just turned into a rictus, a mask of plastic joy that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah," Grant said into the microphone, "and here is the opposition. Everyone, give a warm welcome to my sister, who I am sure has some very detailed spreadsheets she wants to show us." He laughed. A few people chuckled nervously, but most just stared. I walked up the steps to the platform. I did not reach for the microphone he was holding. I stood next to him, close enough to smell the stale coffee and fear on his breath. "Turn it off." "Grant," I said quietly. He pulled the microphone away. "Get off my stage." "Viv," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are embarrassing yourself. I have the room. You have an audience." I corrected. "Not the room." I turned to the crowd. I didn't need a microphone. The acoustics of the atrium were designed to carry sound, and I pitched my voice to reach the back rows, clear and sharp. "I am sorry for the confusion this morning." I said, "There seems to be a misunderstanding regarding the leadership of Alderwick Systems." Grant stepped forward, trying to block me. "Vivian is upset because—" I stepped around him. "There is no new partnership," I said, my voice cutting over his. "The motion to appoint Grant Hayes as managing partner was halted yesterday by the board of directors." Grant laughed, a loud, desperate sound amplified by the mic. "Halted by a technicality. We are sorting it out. It was halted because Seawick Harbor Partners has acquired 51% of the voting stock of this company." I said. The gasp that went through the room was physical. It sucked the oxygen out of the air. I turned to face the crowd fully. "My name is Vivian Hayes. As the majority shareholder and acting chair of the board, I am here to clarify the situation. We are not proceeding with the Copperline integration. We are not rebranding. We are focusing on stabilization and solvency." Grant grabbed my arm. His grip was painful. "You can't do this here," he whispered furiously. "Not in front of them." I pulled my arm away. I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had mocked me at dinner tables for 30 years. The brother who had stolen from the company to pay for his vanity projects. The brother who had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't chosen. I looked at him, and I felt nothing but a profound, exhausting pity. "Actually, Grant," I said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "you are terminated." Grant blinked. "What?" "I am citing the board's vote from yesterday evening," I said, raising my voice so the whole room could hear. "Grant Hayes has been suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of a forensic investigation into the embezzlement of corporate funds via the Blue Meridian shell entity." The words hung in the air like smoke. Embezzlement, shell entity. Grant's face went white. He raised the microphone, trying to rally, trying to find the joke, the spin, the charm that had saved him 1,000 times before. "She is crazy," he shouted. "This is a hostile takeover. She is trying to steal the company from the family." I nodded to the security officers. "Please escort Mr. Hayes from the building," I said. The 2 officers stepped onto the platform. They were large men, professional and impassive. One of them reached for Grant's elbow. "Mr. Hayes," the officer said gently, We need you to come with us. Grant yanked his arm back. Don't touch me. I own this place. I am the CEO. He looked at the crowd, searching for an ally, for anyone who would storm the stage and save him. Tom, he yelled, pointing at the lead engineer. Tell them about the vision. Tom looked at his shoes. Sarah, Grant shouted, pointing at the sales manager. We had a deal. Tell them. Sarah turned away, pretending to check her phone. The officers took hold of him, firmly this time. They began to march him toward the side exit. Grant stumbled, his feet tangling. He tried to laugh. A high-pitched, hysterical sound. Okay, he shouted, half laughing, half sobbing. You want the boring one? You want the librarian? Fine, take her. See how long you last without a vision. The doors swung open, and the sunlight swallowed him. Then the doors swung shut, and he was gone. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the dust of a collapsed empire. I stood on the platform, my hands shaking. I clasped them behind my back. I am sorry you had to see that. I said to the room, I took a breath. I cannot promise you that things will be easy in the coming weeks. We have significant financial challenges to address. There is a warranty liability on the Atlas units that we must honor. There are vendor contracts that must be renegotiated. I looked at the faces, scared, angry, hopeful, but I can promise you this. We will be honest, we will be solvent, and leadership at Alderwick will no longer be evaluated on charisma. It will be evaluated on performance, and it will be evaluated on ethics. I stepped down from the platform. Get back to work, I said softly. The victory lasted exactly 12 minutes. I was in the executive suite, watching the security team clear out Grant's office, when Dana Rowe walked in. She wasn't smiling. She was holding a tablet, and her knuckles were white. Vivian, she said, we have a problem. I sat down in Grant's chair. It was too big for me, and the leather was slippery. What is it? I asked. Did he talk to the press? Worse, Dana said. We just received a digital notification from the American Arbitration Association. She placed the tablet on the desk. Copperline Consulting has filed a claim. I frowned. On a Saturday? How? They were ready. Dana said, they are claiming that your acquisition of the majority stake constitutes a change in control under the terms of their contract. They are demanding the immediate payment of the success fee. $2 million, I said, rubbing my temples. Plus damages, Dana added. They are alleging anticipated breach. They say that by firing Grant and halting the integration, we have signaled an intent to defraud them of their contractually obligated earnings. They are asking for an emergency injunction to freeze our operating accounts until the fee is placed in escrow. I stared at the screen. It was a legal shakedown. Elias Thorne, Grant's fraternity brother, wasn't going to walk away just because his inside man had been fired. He was going to burn the house down to get his money, if they freeze the accounts. We miss payroll on Friday. I said, yes, Dana said, and if we pay them, we are admitting the contract is valid, which kills our embezzlement case against Grant. Exactly. I stood up and walked to the window. The fog was gone, replaced by a harsh, revealing sunlight that made the harbor look industrial and gritty. They want a settlement, I said. They know they might lose in court, but they know we can't afford a public fight right now. They want me to write a check for $500,000 just to make them go away. Do we pay it? Dana asked. No, I said. I turned back to her. We don't negotiate with arsonists. Call Sloan. Tell her to file a countersuit for conspiracy to defraud. And tell her to subpoena Elias Thorne's personal bank records. If we are going to fight, we are going to fight in the mud. The rest of the day was a blur of damage control. I set up a command center in the conference room. I met with the department heads one by one. The questions were brutal. Are there going to be layoffs? Asked the head of marketing, a woman who had been hired by Grant 6 weeks ago. I don't know yet. I answered honestly. I am reviewing the budget. If we can save the jobs, we will, but I won't lie to you. The rebranding budget is gone. Did you plan this? Asked Tom, the engineer. He looked betrayed, even though I had saved him. People are saying you had this planned for months, that you let Grant sign the bad deals so you could trap him. I looked at Tom. I could have told him about the sleepless nights, the panic, the desperation, but he didn't want to hear that. He wanted a leader. I planned for the survival of the company. Tom, I said, sometimes that looks like a trap. But it was a rescue by 6 o'clock. The office was empty. The adrenaline that had sustained me for 3 days finally drained away, leaving me feeling hollowed out, like a husk. I packed my bag. I walked past Grant's office. The door was open. The desk was empty, stripped of the glass nameplate and the stress balls. It looked like no one had ever worked there. I took the elevator down to the garage. My car was the only one left. I drove home in silence. The radio felt too loud. The city felt too busy. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the air was stale. I hadn't been home in 2 days. There was a pile of mail on the floor. I stepped over it and dropped my bag on the sofa. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled half of it on the counter. I wiped it up with a paper towel. The simple, domestic motion broke me. I slid down to the floor, leaning my back against the dishwasher, and I wept. I didn't cry because I had won. I cried because of what I had lost. I had fired my brother. I had publicly humiliated him. I had destroyed the delicate fiction that my family had maintained for 30 years. The fiction that we were a team, that we loved each other, that we were good people. I thought about Malcolm's face in the boardroom, the look of absolute devastation when Grant had lied to him. I knew, with a terrible certainty, that my father would never look at me the same way again. He might respect me. He might thank me for saving his fortune, but he would always see me as the executioner of his son. I had stepped into the role I wanted. I was the managing partner. I was the CEO. But the chair was cold, and the room was empty. My phone buzzed on the floor next to me. It was Dana. I wiped my eyes and picked it up. "Vivian," she said. Her voice was tight, urgent. "Dana, it is Saturday night. Can it wait?" "No," she said. "I am still at the office. I was running the security trace on the network, trying to lock down the external ports to stop Copperline from accessing any more data. And I found something." She said, "I waited. We thought Grant was the leak." Dana said, "We thought he was the one sending the internal metrics to Vanguard and the other competitors. He was—" I said, "We found the printer code." "We found a printer code," Dana corrected. "But I just found the transmission logs for the original data exfiltration. The slide decks that were sent to Vanguard? They weren't sent from Grant's IP address. Who sent them? They were routed through a proxy server." Dana said, "But the user authentication key, it belongs to someone in the finance department." My stomach dropped. Finance. That was Dana's department. "Who?" I whispered. "I don't know yet." Dana said, "The key is generic. It is a super user admin key that was created 3 years ago. But Vivian, Grant didn't know how to create super user keys. He barely knew how to use Excel." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that someone helped him," Dana said, "or someone was using him. Grant was the face of the leak, but he wasn't the architect. He was too sloppy. This back channel? It is sophisticated. It has been running for years." I closed my eyes. The leak didn't start with Grant. Dana said, "It started before he came back to the company. Someone has been selling our data for a long time, and they are still in the building." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the kitchen floor. "Lock it down." "Dana," I said, "revoke every credential, reset every password. No one gets in or out of the server until we know who it is." "I am trying," she said. "But Vivian, trust no one, not even me." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence, staring at the phone. I thought I had finished it. I thought I had cut out the cancer. But I had only cut off the visible tumor. The sickness was deep in the marrow. My phone chimed again. An email. I didn't want to look. I wanted to throw the phone across the room and go to sleep for a week. But I was the CEO. I didn't get to sleep. I opened the notification. Sender. Unknown encrypted address. Subject: Look deeper. There was no body text, just an attachment, a scanned image of an old document. I zoomed in. It was a board resolution from 3 years ago. It was the authorization for the Series B funding round, the capital injection that had kept the company afloat during the lean years. I scanned the signatures: Malcolm Larkin, Elaine Mercer, Grant Hayes, proxy, and one more. A signature I recognized, but one that shouldn't have been there. A signature of a silent partner who was never listed on the public website. Underneath the image, typed in the email body, was a single sentence: check the share ledger from 3 years ago. I stared at the name on the signature line. The betrayal wasn't over, it was just beginning. Thank you for listening to this story. We have walked with Vivian through the boardroom battles, the family betrayals, and the cold reality of corporate revenge. But as we have just seen, the end of one chapter is often just the beginning of a darker mystery. I would love to hear your thoughts on Vivian's choices. Was she right to fire her brother so publicly? Or did she become the villain she was fighting? And who do you think is the real architect behind the leaks? Please leave a comment, letting me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this deep dive into family drama and corporate intrigue, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for the next part of the saga. Share your theories in the comments in English. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, be careful what you sign.